Hello and welcome to Angry Andy Reviews, and apologies for the late delivery of this review for The Last of Us, Episode 8. It is late. I have not been well. I'll just leave it at that. It's been a horrible week and a half, but alas, I need to catch up. So I'm going to push through and get this very quick overview of what was Episode 8. Now, we saw at the back end of episode 7 Joel get attacked and stabbed and really struggling, and of course Ellie is scrambling to get him safe, get him well. And this episode starts pretty much where we've left off. Ellie has managed to drag Joel to the basement of some house and is scrambling to try and find something to fix him with. Joel turns around and says, "Leave me, just leave me, just go." And for all intents and purposes, it appears that Ellie is going to bail. She's going to ditch him, and then she stops as she goes to leave the room, and we cut back. We do a massive cutback, flashback to the time when Ellie was still with the group Fedra, I believe it is, and we see her in this organization, in this military outfit, being drilled and tested and pushed. And yeah, it's a completely different thing to what we've seen. And interesting enough, this sort of side story, you'll have to forgive me here, this sort of side story comes from the DLC, the original downloadable content that came after the release of the first game. So this wasn't in the original game itself. It was a secondary story you could purchase after and play through. And it does go through the origins of how Ellie gets bitten, how she becomes infected, and thus how she becomes immune. So this episode plays into that. Throughout the episode, we see Ellie come across an old friend of hers who everybody assumed had died, disappeared, whatever, and she takes Ellie on a bit of a journey of discovery across the city, wherever they are. And it's a very sweet episode. It's very slow. It's very, again, character engaging, especially for Ellie. We do learn a lot about her personality, pre sort of being infected. She's just as aggressive, not as bitter as she becomes, but she's just as aggressive, just as confrontational with others. Very much wanting to put her point across at all times. But we do see an element of vulnerability here with Ellie in this episode. The only issue that I have with this episode really is that in terms of forward plotting, it doesn't really do anything for the show. There's nothing wrong with the episode. I do think we did need to see how Ellie becomes infected. The ramifications of her becoming infected and what it did to her on a personal level as well. This friend that she is with, spoilers, I mean you should have seen it by now. I'm massively late with this review. The friend she is with also gets infected. They're in this giant mall. They're having a good time in the middle of the night. They're playing around, and there is one of the infected in there, and it startles them. It throws them off when they're having a bit of a good time, and their struggle ensues. They manage to kill the infected creature itself, but not before both being cut or bitten by the creature, and ultimately it's a death sentence. Well, Ellie assumes it's a death sentence for her and for her friend. Her friend is completely beside herself, saying she doesn't even know what to do. She doesn't even know if she can kill herself with her own gun. And it's almost like they're going through those stages, like the bargaining stage. Her friend is, saying, well, what if we wait it out? What if we see what happens? And it's quite poetically sad in a way, because of course we know that Ellie doesn't turn. So that waiting out actually does Ellie a favour in a very dark sense of the, sense of that meaning. But again, it's like I said, it's an episode that doesn't really take us any further in the story. It's an episode that's focused squarely on this backstory, this, what Ellie was previously, what she's become now, the horror that she's seen, and it sort of lends credence to a lot of what we've seen of Ellie, the way that she responds to The people that she loses, everyone that she's losing in her life is another notch on her soul, and it's taking its toll on her. And this episode, it's important in a way that it's placed at this point where Joel is on the verge of death, because Ellie turns around and almost says, "No, no more. I'm not losing anybody else. I'm not having it." We've heard her say before in previous episodes, "I've lost everybody that I've ever known," and this episode is pretty much, pointing towards that. She turns around and she is determined to save Joel. At the end of the episode, she finds some knitting material, some string and a needle, and begins to sort of sew him up to try and get him back together. So we are seeing, in terms of character evolution, we are seeing a progression there, by going back and then blitzing forward. In terms of story, there's not much progression here. But again, as per usual, the acting is superb. The writing is yet again on top form, and it looks fantastic. There's a couple of windy sort of wide shots with the actual mall itself, because it's quite clearly, a green screen effect. This massive mall from a long shot looks a bit weird, looks a bit dodgy. From an internal perspective, but when they're inside, when they're going into these different stores, and they go into an arcade and they play Mortal Kombat 2, which goes back and references a previous episode where Ellie's like, "Have you ever played this game?" to Joel, and we see this brief sort of connection. But beyond that, not really much else happens in this episode, and it's quite a lengthy episode. It is more about character building, it's more about character drama, more about character loss, and we have already experienced a hell of a lot of loss in this series so far. Did it have the impact that it probably should have done? I'm not entirely sure, to be quite honest. The impact of her friend, because we don't actually see her friend die or turn in this episode. Is literally, we are left at the point where they're both contemplating what happens next, where they go next. We don't actually see the ramifications of Ellie's friend turning and Ellie not turning. So, I think unless this latest episode, which I'll be reviewing hopefully in the next couple of days, unless we see something in that, then I'm not sure the impact is really, is really there, to be quite honest. But it's still a very good episode. It's still a good episode. Arguably possibly the slowest and weakest episode so far of the series, but not to a point where it's undermining, what's already been created and where we're going. So I'm settling on a nice, lovely 7 out of 10 for this one. It is the weakest episode for me, but it was pleasant enough in a dark sort of apocalyptic way. Again, the show plays wonderfully well with lighting. It plays wonderfully well with the set. It's unnerving whenever you hear the infected. It's unnerving whenever we go into a dark area. We're anticipating something to happen. We're anticipating the infected to be around the corner, or for somebody to get caught, or, lose themselves and, be caught out by the infected. We are in this point, and the show has done really well at crafting an atmosphere. It's just whether it can maintain the atmosphere going forward, especially with episodes like this, where there's no forward trajectory in terms of the overall plot. But there you go. It's just a couple of minor gripes, but a solid episode. 7 out of 10. I apologise. I don't sound like me at all. Oh God, what a week. But yeah, still here, still going. So, 7 out of 10, and I will be reviewing episode 8 in the next couple of days once I've watched it. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. If you do like this video, please do like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you on the next one. Bye bye.